The whistle of a bullet tearing through the saloon's front window sent the patrons diving for cover, but Clara Lawson remained standing, her gaze steady as shattered glass rained down around her. It wasn't the first threat she'd received since starting her newspaper, and she suspected it wouldn't be the last. What the men who ran Cottonwood Springs didn't understand was that every shot fired only strengthened her resolve to expose the corruption poisoning their town. It was 1882, and the Arizona Territory was no place for a woman with opinions, especially ones that challenged powerful men. Yet Clara had staked her claim here 3 years ago after inheriting a printing press from her uncle. At 26, she'd already survived the loss of her family back east to influenza, and she wasn't about to be silenced by threats. "You all right, Miss Lawson?" Sheriff Wilkes asked, his voice betraying more irritation than concern as he sauntered into the saloon moments later. "Perfectly fine, Sheriff," Clara replied, brushing glass from her skirts. "Though I imagine someone is disappointed their message didn't find its mark." The sheriff's weathered face tightened. "Perhaps if you'd stop printing those inflammatory stories, folks wouldn't get so riled up." "You mean if I stopped writing about how Judge Reynolds dismissed charges against the Silver Peak Mining Company after they collapsed that shaft and killed 3 men? Or how Mayor Patterson awarded his brother-in-law the contract to build the new courthouse at triple the fair price?" The sheriff removed his hat, running fingers through his thinning hair. "Miss Lawson, you're making powerful enemies. I can't guarantee your safety if you continue down this path." "Are you threatening me now, Sheriff?" "I'm warning you, as a courtesy." He placed his hat back on, tilting it low. "Good day, Miss Lawson." Clara watched him leave, noting how not a single patron had approached to check on her welfare. 3 months ago, the saloon would have been filled with concerned voices. Now, people averted their eyes when she passed on the street. Fear was spreading through Cottonwood Springs like a contagion. As she walked back to her newspaper office, Clara felt eyes on her from every darkened doorway. The Western Truth had become the only voice willing to question the alliance between the mining companies and local officials. When she'd published evidence of water sources being contaminated by mining operations upstream of small farms, the retaliation had been swift. Advertisers pulled their business overnight. Her paper carrier was beaten. Anonymous notes appeared under her door. Yet she persisted. The farmers needed someone to speak for them, as did the miners' widows and the shopkeepers being squeezed for protection payments. Her latest investigation had uncovered how the mining companies were manipulating land claims, pushing small ranchers off their property through forged documents and intimidation. The bell above the door jingled as Clara entered her office. The familiar smell of ink and paper usually brought her comfort, but today she felt only weariness. The printing press stood silent in the corner, waiting for tomorrow's edition. She had just sat down at her desk when the door opened again. "We're closed," she said, without looking up. "Thought you might need this," came a deep voice she didn't recognize. Clara raised her head to see a tall man holding out her hat, which must have fallen in the commotion at the saloon. He wore the dust of the trail, his clothes functional rather than fashionable, and a gun belt that showed signs of regular use. His face was sun-weathered beneath the brim of his own hat, but his eyes were kind in a way that had become uncommon in Cottonwood Springs. "Thank you, Mr. Dalton." "Nathaniel Dalton." He set the hat on the edge of her desk. "Just rode into town. Quite an entrance you made at the saloon." Clara smiled despite herself. "Not my usual approach to meeting new people." "I gathered." He glanced around at the newspaper office. "You're the editor here?" "Owner, editor, and chief writer of the Western Truth." She extended her hand. "Clara Lawson." He took her hand firmly, without the hesitation most men showed when faced with her forthright manner. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Lawson, though it seems not everyone in town shares that sentiment." "I've become something of a controversial figure," she admitted. "So I heard. The barkeep was quite vocal about how your meddling is bad for business. Clara sighed. Emmett used to be a friend. Now he won't even serve me a meal. She studied Nathaniel more carefully. What brings you to Cottonwood Springs, Mr. Dalton? We don't get many visitors these days unless they're connected to the mines. I've been hired to help at the Carson Ranch. His expression remained neutral. I go where the work is. Clara felt her guard rise. The Carson Ranch was one of the last holdouts against Silver Peak's expansion. Do you now? And what kind of work is that exactly? The usual. Herding cattle, mending fences. A slight smile touched his lips, keeping an eye out for trouble. Carson's hiring guns now? He's hiring men who can handle themselves. Nathaniel leaned against the doorframe, seemingly in no hurry to leave. Men who believe in fairness. Clara wasn't sure what to make of him. In her experience, drifting cowboys rarely involve themselves in local disputes unless paid well to do so. Mr. Carson is a good man, one of the few still willing to advertise in my paper. Which is why I'm here. Nathaniel reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a folded paper. He asked me to bring this by. Said you'd know what to do with it. Clara unfolded the document and felt her heart race. It was a sworn statement from a former Silver Peak surveyor, detailing how the company had falsified boundary markers to claim Carson's water rights. This was exactly the evidence she needed. This could make a difference, she said, looking up at him with renewed hope. That's what Carson thought. Nathaniel pushed himself away from the doorframe. I'll let you get to your writing, Miss Lawson. Mr. Dalton? She called as he turned to leave. Would you tell Mr. Carson I'll run this in tomorrow's edition? And thank him for his courage. Nathaniel nodded. I will. But you might want to be careful, Miss Lawson. Men who steal land aren't known for playing fair when exposed. I stopped expecting fair play long ago, she replied. But I won't stop seeking justice. Something like admiration flickered in his eyes. Then I suspect we'll be speaking again soon. After he left, Clara sat with the document, reading it several times. With this testimony, she could finally prove what many had suspected. Silver Peak wasn't just bullying ranchers, they were outright stealing land through fraud. She began drafting her article, aware that each word might be throwing oil on an already dangerous fire. The next morning, Clara woke before dawn to operate the printing press herself. Her last assistant had quit after receiving threats against his family. By mid-morning, she had a stack of newspapers ready for distribution. The headline boldly declaring, Silver Peak Mining Company exposed. Former surveyor confirms land fraud. She was arranging them for delivery when Sheriff Wilkes burst through the door, his face flushed with anger. You've gone too far this time, he growled, slapping a copy of the paper on her desk. Judge Reynolds has issued an order to cease publication immediately on grounds of defamation. That's not legal, and you know it, Clara replied, continuing her work. The Constitution protects freedom of the press. Constitution doesn't mean much out here when you're libeling respected businessmen. The sheriff moved closer. I'm shutting you down, Miss Lawson, by order of the court. Clara stood her ground. I have sworn testimony from a company employee. That's not libel, Sheriff. It's news. You have 24 hours to retract your story and issue an apology, or you'll be arrested. He turned to leave, then stopped. And don't think about printing any more papers. I'll be watching. After the sheriff left, Clara sat heavily in her chair. She had expected backlash, but not this quickly. Judge Reynolds had no legal right to shut down her newspaper, but legality meant little when the law itself was corrupt. She needed to distribute the papers she had already printed before they could be confiscated. She was loading bundles into her delivery wagon when she spotted Nathaniel Dalton approaching on horseback. Morning, Miss Lawson, he called, dismounting smoothly. Thought you might need a hand. Unless you can overturn an illegal court order, Mr. Dalton, I'm not sure anyone can help me now. He took in the scene, her determined loading of papers, the set of her jaw. What's happened? Clara explained the sheriff's visit as they continued loading the wagon. Nathaniel listened silently, his expression darkening. So, you're continuing, despite the threat of arrest? He finally asked. I can't back down now. These people deserve the truth. She secured the last bundle. I just need to get these distributed before the sheriff returns with deputies. I'll help, Nathaniel said simply. Clara studied him. Why would you risk trouble for a newspaper you have no stake in? Maybe I believe in what you're doing. He climbed onto the wagon seat and took the reins. Or maybe I just don't like bullies. Either way, I'm driving. You look like you could use the rest. Too tired to argue, Clara climbed up beside him. As they made their way through town, delivering papers to supporters who would further distribute them, she found herself watching Nathaniel. He handled the hostile stares with an easy confidence that suggested he was accustomed to adversity. You're not just a ranch hand, are you? She asked as they finished their deliveries. Nathaniel guided the wagon back toward her office. I've been many things. Cowboy? Army Scout? For a while, I rode with the Pinkerton Agency. A detective? Clara was surprised. What made you leave? Found I didn't always agree with who they decided needed detecting. His eyes met hers briefly. Sometimes the people paying for justice aren't the ones deserving it. As they approached the newspaper office, Clara felt a chill of foreboding. Something was wrong. Then she saw wisps of smoke curling from beneath the door. Fire! She cried, jumping from the wagon before it fully stopped. Nathaniel was faster, leaping down and pulling her back. Wait! But Clara broke free, rushing toward her office. The door was hot to the touch. When she pushed it open, flames leapt from her desk, already consuming the stacks of extra papers she'd left behind. The printing press was slick with kerosene, flames licking up its sides. Strong arms encircled her waist, pulling her back as smoke billowed out. It's too late, Nathaniel said firmly in her ear. The building's done for. People began to gather on the street, watching as flames consumed the Western truth. Some wore expressions of concern, others barely concealed satisfaction. Sheriff Wilkes arrived, making a show of organizing a bucket brigade that formed too slowly to make any difference. Clara stood motionless, watching everything she'd built burn to ashes. The printing press had been her uncle's legacy, the newspaper, her life's purpose. All of it gone. You should have listened, Sheriff Wilkes said, approaching her as the flames died down, leaving only a smoking shell. Some messages can't be ignored. Is this how justice works in Cottonwood Springs? Clara demanded, her voice carrying to the crowd. Burning out those who dare to speak the truth? Be careful, Miss Lawson, the sheriff warned. Accusing respectable citizens of arson is another form of libel. Yet committing arson against a newspaper seems perfectly acceptable, she countered. A murmur ran through the gathered crowd. Not everyone was pleased with what had happened, regardless of their opinions about Clara's journalism. Now you've got no paper and no press, the sheriff said with finality. Maybe it's time to consider moving on to somewhere more suited to your talents. Before Clara could respond, Nathaniel stepped forward, positioning himself slightly in front of her. If this is how Cottonwood Springs treats its own, then perhaps the town doesn't deserve Miss Lawson. And who might you be? The sheriff demanded. Nathaniel Dalton. I work for Carson Ranch. Ah, another troublemaker. The sheriff's hand rested meaningfully on his gun. Mr. Carson would be wise to hire men who mind their own business. Seems to me that when people's land is stolen and the law does nothing, it becomes everyone's business. Nathaniel's voice remained level, but there was steel beneath the calm. Sheriff Wilkes's face flushed. You're new here, Dalton. You don't understand our ways. If your ways include burning down a woman's livelihood for telling the truth, then I understand perfectly. Nathaniel's hand hadn't moved toward his gun, but his readiness was apparent to everyone watching. And I'll stand with her against it. The sheriff looked from Nathaniel to Clara, then to the watching crowd, perhaps sensing the shift in atmosphere. Several of the onlookers, farmers, shopkeepers, ordinary people had drawn closer, their expressions resolute. "You're making a mistake," Sheriff Wilkes said, backing away. "All of you." As he retreated, Clara felt the first stirrings of hope. She wasn't alone after all. "Thank you," she said softly to Nathaniel when the sheriff was gone. He tipped his hat slightly. "Don't thank me yet, Miss Lawson. This is far from over." That evening, Clara sat in the back room of Mr. Finch's general store, where the elderly shopkeeper had offered her temporary lodging. Several supporters had gathered Mr. Finch, two farmers whose water rights had been threatened, the widow of one of the miners killed in the shaft collapse, and Nathaniel Dalton, who leaned against the wall, watchful as always. "They think they've silenced me," Clara said, "but they've only shown their true nature to everyone. People who weren't sure before now have proof of how far Silver Peak will go." "It's not enough to convince everyone," Mr. Finch cautioned. "Many still depend on the mines for their livelihoods." "And those who don't are scared," added Mrs. Holloway, the miner's widow. "They burned your newspaper in broad daylight. What's to stop them from burning our homes next?" Clara had no easy answer for this. The law, which should have protected them, was firmly in Silver Peak's pocket. "We need more than words now," Nathaniel said, speaking up for the first time. "We need evidence that even a corrupt judge can't ignore." All eyes turned to him. "The company keeps its records in the mine office," he continued. "Including, I'd wager, the real survey maps and documents showing who really owns what land." "You're suggesting we break into the mine office?" Clara asked incredulously. "I'm suggesting that sometimes justice needs a helping hand." His gaze was steady. "Carson mentioned that the company's bringing in hired guns from Tucson. Once they arrive, any chance of fighting back will be gone." A heavy silence fell over the room as everyone considered his words. "I can't ask any of you to risk yourselves that way," Clara finally said. "You didn't ask," Mrs. Holloway replied firmly. "But my Jacob died because that company values profits over men's lives. If there's a chance to stop them, I'm willing to take it." One by one, the others nodded their agreement. As the meeting broke up, Clara followed Nathaniel outside. The night was cool, stars brilliant in the clear sky above. For a moment, they walked in silence along the empty street. "Why are you really helping me?" she asked at last. "It can't just be because you don't like bullies?" Nathaniel stopped, turning to face her. In the moonlight, his features seemed softer, more vulnerable than they had appeared in daylight. "My father was a newspaper man in Missouri," he said quietly. "He printed stories about local officials taking bribes from railroad companies. One night, men came to our house. They beat him badly, destroyed his press. He never wrote another word, and something in him died along with his newspaper." His eyes held hers. "When I saw you standing in that saloon after someone took a shot at you, not backing down an inch, I saw what my father could have been if he'd had your courage." The raw honesty in his voice touched something in Clara. "I'm sorry about your father." "Don't be. He taught me the value of truth, even if he couldn't defend it himself." Nathaniel's hand moved as if to touch her arm, then fell away. "What you're doing matters, Miss Lawson. And I won't let them do to you what was done to my father." Clara felt a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the night air. "Clara," she said softly, "I think, after everything, you might call me Clara." A smile touched his lips. "Clara, then." They continued walking, and Clara found herself acutely aware of his presence beside her, solid and reassuring in a world that had become increasingly unstable. The plan they formulated over the next day was dangerous but straightforward. Silver Peak kept its records in a small office adjacent to the main mine entrance. Every Sunday, the office was closed while the mine operated with a skeleton crew. With most of the town at church, including Judge Reynolds and Sheriff Wilkes, they would have their best opportunity. Sunday dawned clear and bright. Clara had spent a sleepless night at Mr. Finch's store, alternating between doubt and determination. What they planned was illegal. But was it wrong? If the law itself had become corrupted, did that not create a moral imperative to seek justice by other means? She met Nathaniel behind the general store as planned. He'd traded his usual attire for darker clothing that would attract less attention. "Last chance to back out," he said as they prepared to leave. "Not a chance," Clara replied. "Besides, I'm the one who can recognize which documents we need." They rode toward the mine on a seldom-used trail, Carson's borrowed horses sure-footed on the rocky ground. Clara had never considered herself an adventurer, but there was something exhilarating about taking action after months of fighting with words alone. As they approached the mine, they dismounted and continued on foot, staying within the cover of scrub brush and boulders. The Sunday shift was indeed minimal, only 2 guards visible outside the main entrance, far enough from the office to give them a chance. "Wait here," Nathaniel whispered, slipping away before Clara could protest. She watched anxiously as he approached the office from behind, moving with a stealth that confirmed his stories of scouting for the army. He tested the back window, found it locked, and moved to try the door. To Clara's surprise, it opened. Perhaps on Sundays, with so few people around, security grew lax. Nathaniel motioned for her to join him. Heart pounding, Clara darted across the open space between her hiding place and the office door. Inside, the office was meticulously organized filing cabinets along one wall, a large desk dominating the center of the room, maps spread across a table in the corner. "We need to hurry," Nathaniel said, keeping watch at the window. "The morning church service will be ending soon." Clara went straight to the filing cabinets, pulling open drawers and scanning the neatly labeled folders. Land acquisitions, water rights, mineral claims. Everything was documented with a precision that belied the company's ruthless tactics. And then she found it a folder marked Survey Adjustments. Inside were the original survey maps alongside altered versions, with notations about whose land was being incorporated and how much the company had saved by avoiding fair payment. There were even letters from Judge Reynolds advising on how to make the transactions appear legitimate. "This is it," Clara said, her voice hushed with disbelief. "Everything we need, proof of fraud, corruption, all of it." "Take it all," Nathaniel said. "We may not get another chance." Clara was gathering the documents when she heard Nathaniel curse softly. "Someone's coming." Through the window she could see a man approaching Wilson Reed, Silver Peak's manager, who should have been at church with the other town leaders. They were trapped. "Out the back," Nathaniel urged, but as they turned, they heard a key in the lock of the rear door. "Under the desk," Clara whispered, pulling Nathaniel down just as the front door opened. Reed entered, accompanied by another man Clara didn't recognize. They stood just inside the doorway, continuing what appeared to be an ongoing conversation. "Judge Reynolds is growing concerned about the situation with Carson's ranch," Reed was saying. "If we don't secure that water access before the territorial surveyor arrives next month, we could lose our claim entirely." "The judge can't delay him again?" the other man asked. "Not without raising suspicions. We need Carson's land now, and that means removing him permanently." Clara felt Nathaniel tense beside her. "What about his new hand, the one helping that newspaper woman?" Reed laughed coldly. "Dalton? He'll be dealt with. I've sent for specialists from Tucson. They should arrive tomorrow." "And the woman? After what happened to her newspaper, she should be leaving town. If not..." Reed's implication hung in the air. "Let's just say Cottonwood Springs isn't a healthy place for troublemakers." They moved further into the room, Reed sitting at the desk while the other man remained standing. Clara and Nathaniel pressed themselves back, barely breathing. Clara clutched the incriminating documents to her chest, terrified that the slightest movement would give them away. "I need the deed templates," Reed said, his boots inches from where they hid. "We'll need to create documentation showing Carson sold us his water rights last year." The other man moved to a filing cabinet, the very one Clara had been searching through moments before. "The survey adjustment folder is missing," he said after a moment. Reed stood abruptly, pushing his chair back. "What? Check again." Clara could hear the rising panic in his voice as the other man searched more thoroughly. "It's gone, Mr. Reed, and some of the land acquisition files, too." "That's impossible. No one has access to this office except—" Reed stopped suddenly. "Check outside, now." As the other man rushed to the door, Nathaniel made a split-second decision. He pushed Clara toward the back door. "Run! I'll hold them off." Before she could protest, he was on his feet, drawing his gun on the startled Reed. "Stay where you are." Clara ran for the door, documents clutched to her chest. Behind her, she heard a scuffle, followed by a gunshot that sent her heart racing. She burst outside, nearly colliding with the second man who was returning. He reached for his gun, but before he could draw, another shot rang out and he fell backward. Nathaniel appeared in the doorway, a cut above his eye but otherwise unharmed. "The horses! Quickly!" They ran together toward where they'd left the horses, hearing shouts from the direction of the mine entrance. The guards had been alerted by the gunfire. Mounting quickly, they galloped away, bullets kicking up dust behind them. Clara rode as she had never ridden before, clinging to both her horse and the precious documents that could save Cottonwood Springs from Silver Peak's corruption. They didn't slow until they had put miles between themselves and the mine, taking a circuitous route back toward town. Finally, in a secluded grove of cottonwoods beside a small stream, they stopped to catch their breath and check that all the documents were intact. "Are you hurt?" Clara asked, noticing blood on Nathaniel's shirt sleeve. "Just a graze." He dismounted, helping her down from her horse. Reed was a better fighter than he looked. Clara set the documents safely aside, then tore a strip from her petticoat to bind his wound. As she worked, their eyes met, and the tension of the day transformed into something else entirely. His hand covered hers where it rested on his arm. "I thought I'd lost you when I heard that second shot," she admitted softly. "It takes more than Silver Peak's thugs to stop me." His voice was gentle, belying the danger they'd just escaped. "Especially when I have something worth fighting for." Clara wasn't sure who moved first, but suddenly his lips were on hers, warm and insistent. She wrapped her arms around his neck, feeling the solid strength of him, alive and real despite everything they'd risked. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Clara felt as though something fundamental had shifted in her world. "We should get these documents somewhere safe," Nathaniel said, though he made no move to release her from his embrace. "Mr. Finch has a safe in his store," Clara replied, "but we need to make copies first in case something happens to the originals." Nathaniel nodded. "And then we need to get word to the territorial marshal in Prescott. This is bigger than Sheriff Wilkes now." They rode back to town cautiously, avoiding the main roads. Cottonwood Springs seemed eerily quiet, the Sunday afternoon lull providing cover for their return to Finch's store. The elderly shopkeeper listened in amazement as they recounted their discovery and narrow escape. "This will change everything," he said, examining the documents. "But Reed and his men will be looking for you both. And those hired guns are due to arrive tomorrow." "I know a place you can hide until the marshal arrives," Mrs. Holloway offered. She had come to the store for supplies and joined their impromptu council. "My late husband built a shelter up in the hills when there was talk of Apache raids years ago. It's well hidden, with a good view of the approaches." Clara spent the rest of the day making careful copies of the most damning documents. Mr. Finch sent his teenage son to Carson Ranch with a warning about Reed's plans, while Mrs. Holloway prepared provisions for Clara and Nathaniel's temporary exile. As dusk fell, they prepared to leave for the hidden shelter. Clara had just finished packing the last of the copied documents when the store's front bell jingled. "We're closed," Mr. Finch called out, moving to intercept whoever had entered. "I'm not here to shop," came Sheriff Wilkes's voice. "I'm looking for Nathaniel Dalton and Clara Lawson. There's been an incident at the mine." Clara and Nathaniel exchanged glances. There was no back exit from the storeroom. "Haven't seen them," Mr. Finch replied evenly. "Not since the newspaper burned down." "Is that so?" Boots thudded on the wooden floor as the sheriff moved further into the store. "Because I have witnesses who say Dalton shot 2 men at the mine office today. And Miss Lawson was seen with him, stealing company property." "Sounds like quite a tale," Mr. Finch said. "But as I said, they're not here." A tense silence followed. Clara could picture the sheriff's suspicious gaze sweeping the store, looking for signs of deception. "I'll be searching the town," the sheriff finally said. "When I find them, and I will find them, anyone who helped them will face charges of aiding fugitives." The bell jingled again as he left. Mr. Finch returned to the storeroom, his face grave. "You need to go now. Take the back alley to Mrs. Holloway's, then head for the hills." They slipped out into the growing darkness, moving from shadow to shadow through Cottonwood Springs. The town that had been Clara's home for 3 years now felt hostile, every window potentially harboring watchful eyes. Yet as they passed certain houses, curtains parted slightly, faces appeared briefly not threatening, but concerned. Word was spreading about what they had discovered. At Mrs. Holloway's small house on the edge of town, they collected the provisions she had prepared and directions to the hidden shelter. As they prepared to leave, the widow pressed something into Clara's hand, a small revolver. "It was Jacob's," she said simply. "He'd want you to have it now." The night journey into the hills was arduous, especially after the day's earlier exertions. They led their horses much of the way, following a barely visible trail that wound through rocky terrain. Clara's city-bred legs ached with each step, but she pushed on, driven by the knowledge of what awaited if they were captured. The shelter, when they finally reached it, was more substantial than Clara had expected, a small cabin built into the hillside, partially covered by earth and vegetation. Inside was sparse but sufficient. A bed, a table, a small stove, and shelves stocked with basic supplies. "We should be safe here until the marshal comes," Nathaniel said, securing the door behind them. Clara sank onto the edge of the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by everything that had happened. "I never meant for any of this," she said quietly. "I just wanted to tell the truth." Nathaniel knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "The truth has a cost. Always has. But it's worth fighting for." He reached up to brush a strand of hair from her face. "You're worth fighting for." Clara leaned into his touch. "When I started the newspaper, I thought words alone could change things. I was so naive." "Words matter," he said firmly. "Your words woke this town up. Made people question what they'd accepted. That's why Silver Peak feared you enough to burn you out. And you stood with me when no one else would." She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. "Why?" "Because some things are worth standing for. Some people are worth standing with." His voice had dropped to a whisper. "I've wandered a long time, Clara. Never found a cause or a place that felt right. Until now. Until you." She kissed him then, a kiss full of gratitude, and something deeper that had been growing between them since that first meeting in her office. As the kiss deepened, Clara felt herself surrendering to feelings she had kept carefully controlled for too long. Here, hidden away from the dangers of Cottonwood Springs, they found in each other a sanctuary more secure than any shelter of wood and stone. Dawn found them entwined beneath rough blankets, Clara's head resting on Nathaniel's chest as he absently stroked her hair. Outside, birds called in the growing light, a world away from the human conflicts below. "What happens after the marshal comes?" Clara asked softly. "After Silver Peak is exposed?" "That depends," Nathaniel replied. "Do you want to rebuild your newspaper?" Clara considered this. "I want to continue telling the truth, but I'm not sure it has to be in Cottonwood Springs." Carson mentioned land opening up near Prescott. Good water, fair soil, room for cattle, maybe a small newspaper. His arm tightened around her. Room for a future. Clara raised herself on one elbow to look at him. "Are you proposing a business arrangement, Mr. Dalton?" His smile was slow and warm. "I'm proposing whatever arrangement keeps us together, Miss Lawson. The details are negotiable." A noise outside interrupted whatever Clara might have replied, the sound of approaching horses. Nathaniel was on his feet instantly, gun in hand, moving to the small window. "3 riders," he reported tensely, "coming up the trail." Clara hurriedly dressed, checking that Mrs. Holloway's revolver was loaded. "Sheriff Wilkes?" "Can't tell yet." Nathaniel positioned himself beside the door. "But they know where to find us, which means either Mr. Finch or Mrs. Holloway talked." "They wouldn't betray us willingly," Clara said with certainty. As the riders drew nearer, Clara joined Nathaniel at the window. Relief flooded her when she recognized Mr. Carson among them. "It's Carson," she said. "And is that a badge on the lead rider?" Nathaniel relaxed slightly. "Territorial Marshal. Looks like our message got through." They opened the door as the riders dismounted. Marshal Jenkins was a stern-faced man with graying hair beneath his hat and the weathered look of someone who had seen his share of frontier justice. He eyed Nathaniel's drawn gun with raised eyebrows. "Mr. Dalton? Miss Lawson? I'm Marshal Jenkins. Mr. Carson here tells me you have evidence of some serious crimes." Over the next hour, they showed the marshal the documents they'd recovered, explaining how Silver Peak had been manipulating land claims and corrupting local officials. The marshal examined everything with methodical care, asking pointed questions that revealed his thorough understanding of territorial law. "This is more than enough for me to take action," he finally said. "Judge Reynolds and Sheriff Wilkes will be removed pending investigation, and I'll be issuing warrants for Reed and several other Silver Peak officials." "What about the men they've sent for?" Carson asked. "The hired guns from Tucson?" "I brought 6 deputies with me, camped down in the valley," the marshal replied. "We'll be ready for them." True to his word, Marshal Jenkins acted swiftly. By nightfall, Sheriff Wilkes and Judge Reynolds were in custody, along with Reed and 2 other Silver Peak executives. The hired guns from Tucson, finding themselves facing legitimate law officers rather than the easy intimidation job they'd expected, chose to ride on without incident. A week later, Clara stood in front of Finch's General Store, watching as workmen unloaded a new printing press. The marshal's investigation had prompted action from the territorial governor himself, who had commissioned Clara to document the case for the public record. "It's not quite the same as your uncle's," Nathaniel said, coming to stand beside her. "But the salesman said it's the latest model." "It's perfect," Clara replied, leaning against him slightly as his arm slipped around her waist. "Though, I'm not sure how much use it will get here." "You're still thinking about Prescott?" Clara nodded. "There's a growing community there that needs a voice, and less entrenched interests to fight against." She turned to face him. "Assuming my business partner is still interested?" Nathaniel's eyes crinkled at the corners as he smiled. "More than interested. In fact, I took the liberty of putting a deposit on a piece of land outside town. Good water, room for cattle, and a solid building that would make a fine newspaper office." His expression grew more serious. "Or a home, if the lady publisher would consider making our partnership more permanent." Clara felt her heart swell. 6 months ago, she had been a lone voice facing powerful enemies. Now she stood on the threshold of a new beginning, with a man who had risked everything to stand beside her when the darkness closed in. "I believe I could be persuaded," she said, rising on tiptoe to kiss him lightly. "After all, every good newspaper needs a strong advocate, and every stubborn, courageous woman deserves someone who recognizes her worth," he replied, pulling her closer. As spring gave way to summer, a new newspaper appeared in Prescott, the Arizona Advocate, published by Clara and Nathaniel Dalton from their homestead just outside town. Its masthead promised truth without fear, a commitment the Daltons upheld through years of territorial growth and change, their partnership in life and work becoming something of a legend in the Arizona territory. They raised 3 children in the house attached to their print shop, teaching them that standing for truth often came at a cost, but that finding someone to stand beside you made any burden bearable. And on quiet evenings, when the presses were still, Clara would sometimes remember that moment in Cottonwood Springs when bullets shattered glass and a stranger returned her hat, the day she discovered that even in the wild justice of the frontier, courage could kindle not only resistance, but also love.